A homeless Navy SEAL found a camera hidden by his father. But his dog uncovered a secret someone killed to bury. A homeless Navy SEAL found his father's old camera. His dog solved a 50-year mystery. The attic was silent except for the wind rattling the old Montana cabin. Homeless, haunted by war, and carrying scars nobody could see, former Navy SEAL Jack Mercer came home only to sell the place and disappear. But when his German Shepherd, Shadow, fixated on an old camera hidden for decades, they uncovered a trail leading to a missing woman. A forgotten crime and a secret powerful men had spent 50 years trying to keep buried. Comment 1 if you'd follow the truth no matter how dangerous it became, or 0 if you'd walk away, and tell us where you're watching from. The Bitterroot Mountains rose like dark giants against the fading Montana sky. Snow still clung to the highest peaks even though spring had begun creeping into the valleys below. Long shadows stretched across the winding mountain road as a battered pickup truck climbed higher into the wilderness. Inside sat Jack Mercer, and beside him sat the only soul left in the world who had never given up on him. Shadow. The German Shepherd rested quietly in the passenger seat, his amber eyes fixed on the road ahead. Every few minutes, he glanced toward Jack, as if checking that his partner was still holding together. Jack wasn't sure he was. 3 years earlier, he had been a Navy SEAL. 2 years earlier, he had still believed he could build a normal life. 1 year earlier, he had lost his apartment, his savings, and most of the friendships that had survived his return from war. Now he was driving toward a cabin he hadn't seen in nearly 20 years. A cabin that belonged to a father he barely understood. The old truck rattled over a cattle guard and continued up the mountain. Jack's jaw tightened. His hands gripped the steering wheel harder than necessary. A sudden flash of memory exploded behind his eyes. Gunfire, dust, a radio screaming for help. A young teammate calling his name, then silence. Jack blinked hard. The mountain road returned. His breathing became shallow. Shadow immediately lifted his head. The dog nudged Jack's arm with his nose. Once, twice. A familiar signal. Stay here. Stay now. Stay safe. Jack released a long breath. Yeah, he whispered. Shadow rested his head against Jack's shoulder. The flashback passed for now. The cabin appeared around the next bend. Jack hadn't been prepared for how small it looked. As a child, it had seemed enormous. Now it looked tired, lonely. The weathered log walls sagged slightly. The porch leaned toward one side. Several window shutters hung crookedly. Tall pine trees surrounded the property like silent guards. No neighboring houses, no sounds, just wind moving through the forest. Jack parked and turned off the engine. Silence settled over everything. For several moments, neither man nor dog moved. Then Shadow jumped down first. The German Shepherd landed softly on the gravel and immediately began scanning the property. His military training never truly disappeared. Neither had Jack's. The dog circled once before returning to the truck. Only then did Jack step out. The mountain air felt cold and clean, different from the cities, different from shelters, different from parking lots where he'd spent too many nights sleeping in his truck. For a brief moment standing before the cabin, he almost felt peace. Then he remembered why he had come. His father was dead. The property belonged to him now. He would clean it out, sell it, take whatever money he could get, then disappear again. Simple. At least that was the plan. The front door groaned when he pushed it open. Dust floated through beams of sunlight. The scent of old wood filled the air. Nothing inside seemed to have changed. A rocking chair still sat beside the stone fireplace. Books remained on shelves. A coffee mug rested on a table, as if William Mercer had only stepped outside for a moment. Jack felt something twist inside his chest. He quickly pushed the feeling away. His relationship with his father had never been easy. Years of distance had created walls neither man knew how to climb. When Jack enlisted after high school, those walls became permanent. Phone calls grew rare. Visits became rarer. Then eventually they stopped altogether. The last conversation they ever had ended in silence. Now, there would never be another chance. Shadow wandered through the cabin room by room. Occasionally he paused and sniffed at old furniture, but the dog remained calm, comfortable, as if he sensed no danger here. The first few hours passed quietly. Jack gathered documents, sorted old boxes, stacked belongings for donation. The work helped keep his mind occupied. Busy hands meant fewer memories, fewer ghosts. Late in the afternoon, he discovered a narrow pull-down ladder hidden in the hallway ceiling. An attic. The ladder creaked under his weight. Dust covered everything above. Old furniture, trunks, fishing equipment, stacks of newspapers. The space felt frozen in time. Shadow followed him up immediately. The dog rarely allowed Jack out of sight, especially when the nightmares had been worse lately. Jack moved deeper into the attic. His flashlight swept across forgotten belongings. Then something caught his attention. An old military footlocker. Army green, metal corners, heavy brass latch. The name W. Mercer remained faintly visible across the side. Jack frowned. His father had never served in the military, at least not that he knew. Curious, he knelt beside the trunk. The latch resisted, then finally snapped open. A cloud of dust rose into the air. Inside were old papers, letters, maps, photographs, and resting beneath everything else was a leather camera case. The moment Jack touched it, Shadow froze, completely froze. The change was immediate. The dog's ears stood upright. His body became rigid. A low whine escaped his throat. Jack looked at him. "What is it?" Shadow stepped closer. His eyes never left the camera case. Not once. Jack slowly lifted it from the trunk. The leather was cracked with age. The brass buckle had darkened. Inside rested an old film camera. Beautiful, heavy, well cared for. Jack turned it over in his hands. Then Shadow suddenly nudged the case. Hard. The dog wasn't interested in the camera. He was interested in something else. Jack examined the interior more closely. His fingers found an unusual seam hidden beneath the lining, a secret compartment. His pulse quickened. Carefully, he pulled it open. Something small dropped into his palm. A memory card, modern, completely out of place. Jack stared at it. The camera looked at least 50 years old. The memory card couldn't have been more than a decade old. None of it made sense. Then he noticed a folded piece of paper tucked behind it. The handwriting was familiar, his father's. Jack unfolded the note. Only one sentence had been written. If they ever stop watching, find the bridge. The attic suddenly felt colder. The wind outside rattled the cabin windows. Shadow moved beside him and pressed against his leg. Jack read the sentence again, and again, and again. If they ever stop watching, who was watching? Watching what? Watching whom? His father had lived alone on this mountain for decades. Who could possibly have been watching him? Jack turned toward the attic window. The forest stretched endlessly beyond the glass. Dark pines, fading sunlight, miles of wilderness. For a strange moment, he felt as if someone might still be out there, waiting. Watching. Shadow stepped between Jack and the window. The German shepherd stared into the trees, completely still, completely focused. As the last light of day disappeared behind the Bitterroot Mountains, Jack Mercer realized he might not be cleaning out an old cabin after all. He might have just inherited a mystery, and somewhere inside that mystery was the reason his father had spent decades living alone on a mountain, holding secrets, waiting for someone to find them. The note trembled slightly in Jack's hand. Below it rested the memory card, and beyond the cabin walls, the dark Montana wilderness seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for what happened next. And beyond the cabin walls, the dark Montana wilderness seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for what happened next. Jack Mercer stood motionless in the attic, staring at the note in his hand, while the last traces of daylight faded beyond the small window. If they ever stop watching, find the bridge. The words felt less like a message and more like a warning. Beside him, Shadow remained rigid. The German shepherd's eyes were fixed on the darkness outside. Jack had seen that posture before. Not in Montana, not in peaceful places. He had seen it in deserts, mountain villages, combat zones, places where danger hid just beyond sight. Slowly, he folded the note and slipped it into his jacket pocket. The memory card followed. Whatever his father had hidden, it could wait until morning. Night had already settled across the Bitterroot Mountains. And something deep inside, Jack told him, that chasing mysteries through the woods after dark was a bad idea. He and Shadow climbed down from the attic. The old cabin groaned softly as the temperature dropped. Jack built a fire in the stone fireplace. Orange flames danced across the walls. For a brief moment, the warmth almost made the cabin feel alive again. Almost. Shadow settled near the hearth, but he didn't sleep. His ears twitched constantly. Listening, watching, waiting. Jack found an old laptop charger among his father's belongings. Hours later, after digging through drawers and cabinets, he finally discovered a functioning laptop tucked inside a desk. The machine was old, slow, dust-covered, but it still worked. Jack inserted the memory card. The screen flickered. A single folder appeared, no title, no description, nothing. Jack opened it. Empty, he frowned. There had to be something. His father wouldn't hide an empty memory card inside a secret compartment. He searched again, still nothing. Then he noticed a tiny encrypted file hidden in the system data. Locked, protected. His father had gone through significant effort to conceal it. Jack leaned back in his chair. A strange feeling settled over him. The old man had never spoken much, never explained himself. Yet somehow he had planned for this. Planned for Jack to find the camera. Planned for Jack to find the note. Planned for Jack to find the card. The realization was unsettling. Outside, wind rattled the trees. Jack glanced toward the dark window. For a split second, he thought he saw movement. A shadow passing between the pines. His muscles tightened instantly. Combat instincts surged to life. Shadow was already standing. The dog moved to the window and stared into the darkness. Neither barked, neither moved. Several long seconds passed. Then the movement disappeared. Probably an animal, a deer, maybe an elk. Yet Jack couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, watching. Just as the note had suggested, the thought followed him into sleep. That night the nightmares returned. He was back overseas, back in the dust. Back hearing gunfire echo through narrow streets. A young teammate named Ryan was calling for help. Jack ran toward the voice. Faster, faster. Too late. Always too late. The explosion came. The same explosion that visited his dreams every week, every month, every year. Jack woke with a violent gasp. Sweat soaked his shirt. His heart hammered against his ribs. The room was dark. The fire had burned low. Immediately, a familiar weight rested against his leg. Shadow, the dog, had climbed beside the bed. His head remained pressed against Jack's knee, grounding him, pulling him back to reality. Jack closed his eyes. Thanks, buddy. Shadow's tail thumped once against the floor. Outside, dawn was beginning to brighten the mountains. Sleep wasn't coming back, so Jack made coffee. By sunrise, he had already made his decision. The note mentioned a bridge. The town would know something. Maybe someone there remembered his father. Maybe someone knew why William Mercer had spent decades hiding on this mountain. An hour later, Jack drove down towards Cedar Ridge. The road wound through forests and valleys, painted gold by morning sunlight. The town appeared gradually. A church steeple, a gas station, a diner, rows of weathered storefronts. It looked like hundreds of small towns scattered across the American West. Quiet, ordinary. But the moment Jack arrived, he sensed something beneath the surface. Something unspoken. People noticed him. Several stared openly. Others looked away too quickly. Shadow remained alert inside the truck. Jack parked near the town square and stepped out. A cold breeze swept through the streets. The diner seemed like the best place to start. Inside, the scent of bacon and coffee filled the air. Conversations drifted between booths. Old men gathered around mugs. Waitresses moved between tables. The atmosphere felt warm, until Jack introduced himself. "I'm Jack Mercer." The reaction was immediate, not dramatic, not obvious, but unmistakable. Conversations slowed. A few heads turned. One elderly man nearly dropped his coffee cup. The waitress blinked. "Mercer?" Jack nodded. "My father was William Mercer." Silence spread through the diner. Not complete silence, but enough. The kind of silence people create when they suddenly remember something unpleasant. The waitress forced a smile. "Well," she cleared her throat, "haven't heard that name in years. What happened to him?" Jack asked. Nobody answered immediately. Finally, an older rancher spoke from a nearby booth. "He kept to himself," another man snorted. "That's one way to put it." The first rancher shot him a warning look. The second man shrugged. "What? Everyone knows." Jack felt tension building. What does everyone know? The rancher stared into his coffee. Finally, he said quietly, "Your father spent most of his life chasing ghosts." The words hung in the air. Another voice joined in, an elderly woman near the counter. "He never stopped looking for Rachel." Jack turned. "Rachel?" The woman's expression softened. "Rachel Dawson." The name seemed to affect the entire room. Several people lowered their eyes. Others exchanged uneasy glances. "Who was she?" Jack asked. The woman hesitated, then answered, "The girl who disappeared." Jack felt a chill. Disappeared? 50 years ago. Nobody smiled now. Nobody joked. Even the clatter of dishes seemed quieter. The elderly woman folded her hands. Rachel Dawson was 23, smart, kind, loved these mountains. What happened to her? No one knows. Jack noticed Shadow suddenly becoming restless beside him. The dog shifted uneasily. His ears flattened slightly. The reaction caught Jack's attention immediately. The woman continued. "She vanished one autumn afternoon and never came home." "And my father?" The room became uncomfortable again. This time, nobody rushed to answer. Finally, the rancher spoke. "Your father spent years trying to find her. That sounds like a good thing." Some people didn't think so. Jack's jaw tightened. "What does that mean?" The rancher sighed. "People talk in small towns." Another man muttered. "They talked a lot." The pieces began falling into place. Whispers, rumors, accusations. Jack suddenly understood why everyone reacted when he mentioned William Mercer. His father hadn't simply been an outsider. He had been connected to one of the town's oldest wounds. The waitress quietly refilled Jack's coffee. Then she leaned closer. "There were people who thought your father knew more than he admitted." Jack stared at her. "And what did you think?" She looked toward the window, toward the mountains. "I think the truth died a long time ago." Shadow let out a low whine. Everyone looked toward the dog. The German shepherd's gaze had fixed on a faded photograph hanging near the diner entrance. A newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. Jack walked over. At the center of the photograph stood a smiling young woman, Rachel Dawson. For reasons he couldn't explain, Shadow seemed unable to look away. The dog's posture became tense, focused, almost troubled. Jack stared at the photograph, then at the date beneath it. 50 years, half a century. And somehow his father had spent decades connected to this mystery. Outside, clouds drifted across the mountains. Inside, Jack felt the first real pull of something larger than himself. He had come to Cedar Ridge planning to sell a cabin. Now he was leaving with questions. Questions about Rachel Dawson. Questions about William Mercer. Questions about a bridge hidden somewhere in the Montana wilderness. And for the first time, Jack realized his father may not have spent his life hiding from the world. He may have spent it searching for something the world wanted forgotten. As Jack and Shadow stepped back into the cold mountain sunlight, neither noticed the man watching them from a pickup truck parked across the street. The stranger lowered a pair of binoculars, picked up a phone, and quietly made a call. "He's asking questions." A pause. Then the man listened. His expression darkened. "I understand." The call ended. Across the street, Jack and Shadow climbed into the truck and drove away. Neither knew that after 50 years of silence, old secrets had just begun moving again. Across the street, Jack and Shadow climbed into the truck and drove away. Neither knew that after 50 years of silence, old secrets had just begun moving again. The road out of Cedar Ridge wound through rolling hills and pine-covered ridges bathed in afternoon sunlight. Jack drove slowly. His thoughts remained trapped inside the diner. Rachel Dawson, the missing woman, the whispers, the silence that had filled the room when he mentioned his father's name. Nothing about it felt normal. People didn't react that way to old stories, not unless those stories still had power. Shadow sat quietly beside him, but every now and then the dog glanced toward Jack as if sensing the storm building inside him. The mountains passed outside the windows. Golden grass swayed in the wind. Snow glittered on distant peaks, yet Jack barely noticed any of it. His attention remained fixed on a single question. Why had William Mercer spent decades searching for Rachel Dawson? The answer had to be connected to the bridge, and somehow his father had known Jack would eventually come looking. As they climbed back toward the cabin, Jack made a decision. He needed someone who had actually known William, someone who wasn't afraid to talk. The woman in the diner had mentioned a name. Evelyn Brooks, the retired photographer, the one person who supposedly respected his father. Back at the cabin, Jack searched through old papers until he found an address. The next morning, he and Shadow headed out again. Evelyn Brooks lived on the far edge of Cedar Ridge in a white farmhouse, overlooking a meadow filled with wildflowers. The property seemed untouched by time. A weathered windmill turned lazily beside a red barn. Bluebirds darted between fence posts. A line of old cameras decorated the porch railing. The moment Jack stepped from the truck, he knew photography wasn't just Evelyn's profession. It had been her life. Shadow walked beside him as they approached the front door. Before Jack could knock, it opened. An elderly woman stood there. Silver hair, kind eyes, sharp posture despite her age. She studied Jack for several seconds. Then her gaze moved to Shadow. A faint smile appeared. "You must be William's boy." Jack blinked. "How did you know?" "The eyes," she smiled sadly. "You have your mother's kindness and your father's stubbornness." Jack found himself smiling for the first time in days. "Mrs. Brooks? Evelyn is fine." She stepped aside. "Come in." The farmhouse smelled of old books and coffee. Photographs covered nearly every wall. Mountain landscapes, families, wildlife, decades of local history preserved in frames. Jack felt as though he had stepped into a museum dedicated to Cedar Ridge. Evelyn prepared coffee while Shadow settled near the kitchen table. The dog immediately relaxed. Something about Evelyn seemed trustworthy. Animals often knew things people missed. After a few moments, Jack carefully removed the old camera from his backpack. Evelyn froze. The color drained from her face. For several seconds, she simply stared. Then she reached forward and touched the camera as if greeting an old friend. "I haven't seen this in years. You recognize it?" She nodded. "Of course." Her voice softened. "Your father carried this camera everywhere." Jack sat forward. "You knew him well?" Evelyn looked toward the window. Beyond the glass, mountains stretched beneath a bright blue sky. "I knew the man everyone forgot." Silence settled between them. Finally, Jack asked the question that had haunted him. "Who was my father really?" Evelyn sighed. "A lonely man." The answer surprised him. "He wasn't always that way." Her eyes grew distant. When William first came to Cedar Ridge, he was curious about everything. He loved these mountains, loved stories, loved people. What happened? A shadow crossed her face. Rachel Dawson, the name again. Always the same name. Jack felt tension return. What happened between them? Evelyn immediately shook her head. "Nothing people claimed." "What do you mean?" "The town loves simple explanations." Her voice hardened slightly. "When Rachel disappeared, people wanted someone to blame. And they chose my father, eventually." Jack leaned back. The story was beginning to take shape. Rachel vanished. William searched for her. The town became suspicious. Years passed. His father became an outcast, but none of it explained why. Evelyn noticed his frustration. "There's something I want to show you." She stood and disappeared down a hallway. Moments later, she returned carrying a small metal box. Inside were old film supplies, negatives, photographs, developing tools. Then she looked at the camera. "Did you find any film inside?" Jack nodded. There was one undeveloped roll. Her eyes widened. "One roll?" Jack reached into his backpack. "I brought it." For the first time, genuine excitement appeared on Evelyn's face. "We're going to develop it." An hour later, they stood inside her dark room. The room glowed red beneath a safety lamp. Chemical scents filled the air. Trays of liquid sat beneath enlargers and drying lines. Shadow lay quietly near the doorway watching. Waiting. Jack had never seen film developed before. The process felt almost magical. Images emerging from darkness, memories returning to life. Evelyn worked carefully, patiently, the way someone handles precious things. One photograph appeared, then another and another. Mountain landscapes, forests, streams, wildflowers, scenes from around Cedar Ridge decades ago. Jack smiled despite himself. His father had been talented, very talented. Then another image emerged, and Evelyn suddenly stopped moving. The room became silent. Jack felt his stomach tighten. "What is it?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slowly lifted the photograph. Jack stepped closer. The image stole his breath. A young woman stood beneath an enormous wooden railroad bridge. Wind moved through her long hair. She was smiling, alive, beautiful, confident. Yet there was something unsettling about the image. Something wrong. Jack stared, then understood. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking behind it, at someone or something. "Evelyn." His voice barely emerged. "Is that Rachel?" The elderly woman nodded. "Yes." Neither spoke for several seconds. The photograph seemed almost unreal. A frozen moment from half a century ago. A ghost trapped in time. Then Jack noticed another detail. Near the edge of the image, almost hidden in shadow, a man stood beneath the bridge. Only part of his body was visible. His face remained obscured. Yet his presence changed everything. The figure felt wrong. Watching, waiting, threatening. Jack stared at the silhouette. "Who's that?" Evelyn slowly shook her head. No one ever knew. The answer only deepened the mystery. At that exact moment, Shadow stood. The German shepherd walked directly to the photograph. His nose hovered inches above it. Then something unexpected happened. The dog placed a paw directly on the image, specifically on the bridge. Not Rachel, not the shadowy figure. The bridge. Jack frowned. Shadow pawed the image again, then again. The dog was trying to communicate something. "What do you see, buddy?" Shadow whined softly. His eyes remained fixed on the bridge. Evelyn looked between them. "I've never seen a dog react to a photograph before." Neither had Jack. But Shadow wasn't confused. He was focused. The same focus he'd shown in the attic. The same focus he'd shown whenever Rachel's name appeared. The bridge mattered. For some reason, Shadow knew it. Evelyn carefully examined the photograph. Then her expression changed. "Wait." She moved closer to the image. There, Jack followed her gaze. Near one support beam, barely visible, a carved symbol almost impossible to notice. A small mark etched into the wood. "Evelyn?" Her eyes widened. "I know that bridge." Jack's pulse quickened. "You do?" It's still standing. The room seemed to shrink around him. The bridge wasn't just part of an old photograph. It still existed, after 50 years, waiting, exactly as the note had promised. Find the bridge. Outside, dark clouds were beginning to gather above the mountains. Wind rattled the farmhouse windows. Inside the dark room, Jack stared at the image while questions multiplied. Why had William hidden this photograph? Why had he hidden the memory card? Why did Shadow keep reacting to the bridge? And most importantly, what had his father believed was hidden there? For the first time since arriving in Montana, Jack felt genuinely close to an answer. Not close enough to understand the mystery, but close enough to touch it. And somewhere beyond the forests of Cedar Ridge, Deep inside Black Creek Canyon, an old railroad bridge waited beneath 50 years of silence, holding secrets that were finally beginning to wake up. And somewhere beyond the forests of Cedar Ridge, deep inside Black Creek Canyon, an old railroad bridge waited beneath 50 years of silence, holding secrets that were finally beginning to wake up. The next morning arrived wrapped in cold mountain fog. Jack Mercer stood on the cabin porch, holding a steaming mug of coffee, while dawn slowly painted the Bitterroot Mountains in shades of silver and gold. Below him, layers of mist drifted through the valleys like rivers of cloud. The world felt peaceful, too peaceful, the kind of peace that existed moments before a storm. Shadow sat beside him. The German shepherd's ears twitched toward the distant forest. Always listening, always watching. Jack looked down at the photograph once more. Rachel Dawson, the bridge, the hidden figure, the mystery that had consumed his father's life. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about selling the cabin. He wasn't thinking about leaving Montana. He wasn't even thinking about the nightmares. He was thinking about answers. And the bridge was where those answers waited. An hour later, Jack loaded supplies into the truck: rope, flashlights, water, a first aid kit. Years in the military had taught him one lesson above all others. Preparation kept people alive. Shadow jumped into the passenger seat without being asked. The dog seemed unusually eager, as if he somehow understood where they were going. The drive to Black Creek Canyon took nearly 2 hours. The road narrowed as they climbed deeper into the wilderness. Cell phone reception disappeared. The forests thickened. Towering pines lined the mountainsides like ancient sentries. Occasionally, Jack passed abandoned homesteads, swallowed by time. Broken fences, collapsed barns, rusting farm equipment, evidence of lives long gone. Eventually, the road ended at an overgrown trailhead. A weathered sign stood nearby. Black Creek Canyon, no maintenance beyond this point. Use caution. Jack grabbed his backpack. Shadow was already waiting. Together, they started down the trail. The canyon revealed itself gradually. First came the sound, water roaring somewhere below. Then the cliffs appeared, massive walls of stone dropping hundreds of feet into darkness. The trail wound through forests perched high above the river. Branches swayed in the wind. Sunlight filtered through pine needles. Everything felt enormous, ancient, untouched. After nearly an hour of hiking, Jack finally saw it. The bridge. It stretched across the canyon like a skeleton from another age. Massive wooden supports anchored to both cliffs. Weathered railroad ties crossed the span. Many had begun to rot. Others were missing entirely. The structure looked abandoned, forgotten, dangerous. Yet somehow it remained standing, exactly as it had in the photograph. Jack stopped. For a moment he simply stared. Half a century, 50 years of snowstorms, rain, wind, and the bridge was still here. Shadow moved forward first, his pace quickened, purposeful, focused. Jack followed carefully. Each step across the bridge produced soft creaks from the aging wood. Far below, the river thundered through the canyon. The drop was dizzying. The air smelled of pine sap and cold stone. Near the center of the bridge, Jack stopped. This was where Rachel had stood. He compared the photograph to the view around him. The angle matched perfectly. The mountains, the canyon walls, even the shape of the river bend. Everything aligned. Shadow began sniffing the wooden planks, back and forth, again and again. The dog ignored the breathtaking scenery, ignored the height, ignored everything except the bridge itself. Then suddenly he froze. His nose pressed against one section of weathered boards. Jack walked over. "What is it?" Shadow pawed at the wood. Once, twice, 3 times. The exact same behavior he had shown with the photograph. The bridge. Always the bridge. Jack knelt beside him. The plank looked ordinary, old, worn, nothing special. But Shadow refused to move. The dog scratched harder. Wood chips scattered across the bridge. Jack examined the area more closely. Then he noticed something. Tiny metal screws. far newer than the surrounding wood. His pulse quickened. Someone had modified this section, carefully, deliberately. Years after the bridge was built, Jack pulled a multi-tool from his backpack. Within minutes, he removed the screws. The board lifted free. Beneath it was a narrow cavity hidden inside the structure, and inside the cavity sat a rusted metal container. For several seconds, Jack simply stared, his heart hammered against his ribs. Shadow sat beside him, watching, waiting. The German shepherd's tail moved slowly, almost proudly. "You found it." Jack couldn't help smiling. "Good boy." The dog leaned against him briefly, then returned his attention to the container. Jack carefully lifted it free. The metal was heavily corroded. Its hinges protested when he opened it. Inside lay the first real secret. Dozens of photographs, newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and a weathered leather journal. Rachel Dawson's name appeared on the first page. Jack's breath caught. This wasn't random evidence. This belonged to Rachel herself. He opened the journal. The handwriting was neat, organized, professional. The entries stretched across months. Descriptions of fieldwork, wildlife observations, water testing locations, environmental concerns. At first, the journal seemed ordinary. Then the tone changed, gradually, subtly. Rachel began mentioning unusual activity. Trucks operating at night, restricted areas, strange dumping sites hidden deep in the mountains. People who became hostile when she asked questions. Jack continued reading. The deeper he went, the more troubled he became. Rachel wasn't investigating wildlife anymore. She was investigating people. Dangerous people. Several pages later, a name appeared repeatedly. Calvin Granger. Jack recognized it immediately. Everyone in Cedar Ridge knew that name. Calvin Granger owned enormous ranches throughout the valley. His businesses employed hundreds. Schools bore his donations. Community centers displayed plaques honoring him. He was practically local royalty. Yet, Rachel's notes painted a very different picture. Illegal dumping. Land acquisitions obtained through intimidation. Environmental violations. Hidden transactions. The accusations were serious, very serious. Jack looked up from the journal. The canyon suddenly felt different, less beautiful, more threatening. He understood now why Rachel might have vanished, and why William Mercer had spent decades searching for answers. Shadow moved to the edge of the bridge. The dog stared toward the distant forest. A low growl rumbled deep in his throat. Jack immediately became alert. The growl wasn't fear, it was warning. He stood and scanned the canyon. At first he saw nothing. Then sunlight flashed briefly on a distant hillside. A reflection, metal, binoculars maybe. A scope, something, someone. The flash vanished instantly. Jack's military instincts activated. Every nerve sharpened. Every sense heightened. The feeling was familiar, too familiar. Being watched. The exact phrase from the note echoed in his mind. If they ever stop watching, his father hadn't written those words casually. He had written them because someone really had been watching. Maybe for years, maybe for decades. Jack carefully closed the journal. The photographs returned to the container. Every piece of evidence went into his backpack. The mystery had changed. Before today, he had been investigating the past. Now the past seemed to be watching back. The hike-out felt different. Every snapping branch made him turn. Every shifting shadow caught his attention. Nothing happened. No one appeared. Yet the sensation remained. Someone knew they had found the bridge. Someone knew they had uncovered something important. By late afternoon, Jack and Shadow reached the truck. The sky had darkened. Storm clouds gathered over the mountains. Thunder rolled in the distance. As Jack loaded his gear, Shadow suddenly turned toward the parking area. The German shepherd's posture stiffened. Jack followed his gaze. Fresh tire tracks. They hadn't been there earlier. Another vehicle had arrived after them, then left. Jack crouched beside the tracks. Large tires, heavy truck. Recent, very recent. The realization sent a chill through him. They weren't alone out here. They never had been. The first drops of rain began falling as Jack climbed into the driver's seat. Shadow remained focused on the road behind them, watching. The same way he had watched the forest outside the cabin, the same way he had watched the bridge. As the storm swept across Black Creek Canyon, Jack gripped the steering wheel and glanced at the backpack resting beside him. Inside lay Rachel Dawson's journal. Inside lay proof that the mystery was never about romance, never about jealousy, never about a simple disappearance. It was about corruption, power, secrets worth killing for. And for the first time since arriving in Montana, Jack Mercer realized something deeply unsettling. The mystery he had inherited wasn't buried. It was still alive. The mystery he had inherited wasn't buried. It was still alive. The storm followed Jack all the way back to the cabin. Rain hammered against the windshield as lightning flashed across the Bitterroot Mountains. The narrow mountain road twisted through darkness and sheets of water. Shadow remained alert in the passenger seat. The German Shepherd never relaxed once during the drive. Every few minutes, he looked behind them through the rear window. Watching, tracking, listening, Jack noticed. The dog had done the same thing ever since they left Black Creek Canyon. Whatever Shadow sensed, it hadn't gone away. By the time they reached the cabin, night had fully settled over the mountains. Thunder rolled across the valley. Wind bent the treetops. The forest seemed alive. Jack carried Rachel Dawson's journal inside as if it were made of glass. The old cabin creaked beneath the storm. Rain drummed against the roof. The fireplace crackled. Yet despite the warmth, an uneasy feeling settled over him. The sensation that someone had crossed an invisible line. Someone had noticed. He spread the evidence across the kitchen table. Photographs, newspaper clippings, Rachel's journal. Every piece felt heavier than it should. The deeper he read, the more disturbing the picture became. Rachel hadn't been chasing rumors. She had documented locations, recorded dates, collected evidence. Several pages described contaminated streams near logging sites. Others detailed suspicious land transfers involving local officials. Again and again, one name appeared, Calvin Granger. Each mention carried increasing urgency. Rachel had clearly become frightened. Toward the end of the journal, her handwriting changed. The neat lettering became rushed. Anxious, one entry stopped Jack cold. October 14, someone followed me home again. I'm not imagining it anymore. If anything happens to me, the records are real. The words seemed to echo inside the room. Jack stared at the page. The same fear that haunted Rachel 50 years ago suddenly felt very present. Very real. Shadow lifted his head. A low growl emerged from his chest. Jack immediately looked toward the window. Lightning illuminated the forest. Nothing. Dark trees, falling rain. Yet Shadow continued staring. The dog slowly moved toward the front door. Jack trusted that instinct. He always had. Shadow wasn't aggressive by nature. He didn't react without reason. Jack extinguished the kitchen light. The cabin fell into darkness. He stepped carefully toward the window. Another flash of lightning lit the mountainside. This time he saw it. Headlights. Far down the road, a vehicle. Parked. Not moving. Watching. The lights disappeared almost immediately. But Jack had seen enough. His stomach tightened. Someone was out there. The note from his father replayed in his mind. If they ever stop watching. The next morning, the vehicle was gone. Only tire tracks remained in the muddy road. Jack photographed them. Years of military training had taught him not to ignore details. Small things often mattered. The mountains were quiet again. Birdsong returned. Sunlight streamed through the trees. Yet the peaceful scene felt false, like a stage set hiding something darker. Jack drove into Cedar Ridge shortly after sunrise. He needed supplies and answers. The town looked normal. People opened shops. Children walked to school. Farmers loaded feed into trucks. Life continued as if nothing had changed. But Jack noticed something different. People were watching him, not openly, subtly. A glance held too long. A conversation that stopped when he approached. A store owner who suddenly found something interesting to organize when Jack entered. The atmosphere felt heavier, more cautious. By lunchtime, he found himself sitting alone inside the diner again. The same waitress approached. Her smile seemed strained. "You okay?" Jack nodded. "Why?" She hesitated, then quietly asked, "You making friends with old ghosts?" The question surprised him. What does that mean? The waitress glanced around the diner, making sure nobody was listening. "People are talking." Jack leaned forward. "About me? About you asking questions?" His expression remained neutral. "What kind of questions?" "The kind your father used to ask." A chill ran through him. Even now, after all these years, people remembered. The waitress lowered her voice further. "William used to come in here with notebooks, maps, photographs." She paused. "He'd sit for hours asking about Rachel." "What happened?" Her eyes darkened. "People got tired of it." Jack understood. The town hadn't wanted answers. It had wanted the mystery to disappear, just like his father never had. After leaving the diner, Jack stopped at the local bank. The moment he inserted his debit card into the ATM, an error message appeared. "Transaction denied," he frowned. Tried again. Same result. A third attempt. Nothing. Inside the bank, a young employee looked uncomfortable as she checked his account. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mercer." "What happened?" She swallowed. "Your account has been temporarily restricted." Jack stared at her. "Restricted?" "There's a review in progress." "What kind of review?" She shook her head. "I don't know." The explanation felt wrong. Very wrong. Jack had little money left. Every dollar mattered. Yet somehow, immediately after finding Rachel's evidence, his account had been frozen. Coincidence seemed unlikely. Outside, Shadow was waiting beside the truck. The dog's posture changed the moment Jack approached. Alert, focused. Jack followed his gaze. Across the street sat a dark pickup truck, the same model as the one he'd glimpsed during the storm. Two men occupied the front seats. Neither looked away when Jack noticed them. One smiled slightly, not friendly, not threatening, just enough to send a message. "We see you." Jack climbed into his truck. The pickup across the street started its engine. When Jack pulled away, it followed. Not close enough to be obvious, not far enough to lose sight of him. The tail remained with him through 3 turns, past a gas station, past the post office, past the edge of town. Only when Jack suddenly turned onto an old service road did the truck continue straight, gone. But the message had already been delivered. The hunters had awakened. That evening, Jack returned to the cabin feeling exhausted. Not physically, mentally. The pressure was building. Questions were multiplying, and the enemy remained invisible. Shadow stayed close all evening. The German shepherd followed him from room to room, never more than a few feet away. As darkness settled over the mountains, Jack stepped outside. The sky blazed with stars, millions of them, brilliant against the black wilderness. The view should have been calming. Instead, it reminded him how isolated he truly was. One cabin, one dog, miles from help, the perfect place for someone to disappear. A sudden memory surfaced. Not a nightmare this time, a real memory. His father standing beside him when he was 12 years old, teaching him how to identify constellations, pointing toward the night sky, laughing. For a brief moment, Jack could almost hear his voice again. The memory hurt more than he expected, because it reminded him how little he had known the man. William Mercer hadn't been a mystery only after death. He had been a mystery in life too. And now Jack was following the trail that had consumed him. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Shadow stepped outside. The dog pressed against his leg, steady, loyal, present. Jack rested a hand on the German shepherd's neck. "Looks like we're in this together." Shadow glanced toward the dark forest. His ears suddenly stood upright. The dog froze, every muscle tightened. Jack immediately followed his gaze. At first he saw nothing, then movement, deep among the trees. A silhouette, standing motionless between 2 pines, watching the cabin, watching them. The figure remained there only a second, then disappeared into darkness. Jack's pulse surged. He ran toward the edge of the clearing, Shadow beside him. But by the time they reached the tree line, whoever had been there was gone. Only silence remained, and one unmistakable realization. Someone wasn't merely interested in Rachel Dawson's disappearance. Someone was actively protecting whatever truth remained hidden. Back at the cabin, Jack locked every door. He placed Rachel's journal inside a secure metal box. Then he sat alone by the fireplace, the flames reflected in his eyes. The mystery had changed again. No longer curiosity, no longer discovery. Now it carried something else. Danger, real danger. And somewhere out there, hidden beyond the mountains, the people who had spent 50 years burying the truth had finally noticed William Mercer's son, and they were beginning to move. And somewhere out there, hidden beyond the mountains, the people who had spent 50 years burying the truth had finally noticed William Mercer's son, and they were beginning to move. The realization stayed with Jack long after midnight. The fire in the stone fireplace had burned down to glowing embers. Outside, the Montana wilderness stretched beneath a sky crowded with stars. Inside the cabin, sleep refused to come. Jack sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by Rachel Dawson's journal, old photographs, and handwritten notes that smelled faintly of mildew and age. Shadow lay nearby. At least he appeared to be resting. But every few minutes one ear twitched. Every few minutes his eyes opened. The German shepherd was monitoring the room even while pretending to sleep. Jack understood the feeling. Years of military service had trained both of them to stay alert. For Jack, however, the vigilance came with a cost. At 2 a.m, exhaustion finally dragged him into sleep. The nightmare arrived immediately. He was back overseas, back in a mountain valley on the other side of the world. Snow drifted through the darkness. Radio chatter crackled in his ear. His team moved through a narrow canyon. Then came the explosion. The same explosion. The same flash. The same helpless feeling. Jack saw one of his teammates disappear into dust and fire. He tried to run toward him, tried to help, but his legs refused to move. The world slowed. The screams echoed, then silence. Jack woke violently. His heart pounded, his breathing came in short bursts. The cabin walls felt too close. The darkness felt heavy. A wet nose touched his hand. Shadow. The dog had already climbed beside his chair. Without hesitation, Shadow rested his head on Jack's knee, grounding him, pulling him back. Jack closed his eyes. For several minutes neither moved. The only sound was the wind outside. Eventually his breathing steadied. The panic passed. As always, Shadow had pulled him through it. "Good boy," Jack whispered. The dog's tail tapped softly against the floor. Morning arrived with clear skies and cold mountain air. Sunlight spilled across the cabin porch. The world looked peaceful again. But Jack knew better. Somewhere out there, people were paying attention. The question was why, and how much they already knew. He returned to Rachel's journal after breakfast. The later entries were more frantic than the earlier ones. Several pages contained maps, coordinates, directions, small sketches. One location appeared repeatedly. A fire lookout tower. The structure sat high above Cedar Ridge on a remote mountain ridge. Rachel had circled it several times. Beside the location, she had written only 3 words: "Backup files here." Jack stared at the page. His pulse quickened. Backup files. Rachel had hidden something. Maybe more evidence, maybe answers, maybe the reason she disappeared. By mid-morning, Jack and Shadow were back on the road. The route climbed deep into the mountains. The higher they traveled, the rougher the terrain became. The paved roads disappeared. Then the gravel roads disappeared too. Eventually, only old logging trails remained. Tall pines crowded both sides of the path. Snow lingered in patches beneath the trees. The wilderness felt endless. Several times Jack checked his mirrors. No vehicles followed. No signs of surveillance. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that eyes remained on him. The lookout tower finally appeared, shortly after noon. It stood alone atop a rocky ridge, overlooking miles of wilderness. The wooden structure rose above the trees, like a forgotten monument. Weather and time had taken their toll. Paint peeled from the walls. Several windows were broken. One corner of the observation deck sagged noticeably. The tower looked abandoned, exactly the kind of place someone might hide something. Jack parked and stepped out. The view was breathtaking. Mountain ranges stretched to every horizon. Valleys rolled away in waves of green and gold. Lakes glimmered in the distance. It was easy to understand why fire watchers had once spent entire summers here. Shadow moved ahead. Unlike Jack, he showed no interest in the scenery. His focus remained on the tower. The dog climbed the stairs quickly. Jack followed. Inside, dust covered everything. Old maps still hung on the walls. A rusted stove sat in one corner. The room felt frozen in time. Jack searched carefully. Drawers, cabinets, shelves. Nothing, no evidence, no files. No hidden boxes. For nearly an hour he found nothing useful. Frustration began creeping in. Maybe Rachel had removed the files. Maybe someone else had found them years ago. Maybe the trail had gone cold. Then Shadow started barking. Not aggressively, not urgently, excitedly. Jack turned. The dog stood in the center of the room, pawing at the wooden floorboards. Again and again and again. Jack walked over. "What is it, buddy?" Shadow scratched harder. Wood splintered beneath his claws. The dog refused to stop. Jack knelt beside him. At first, the floor appeared normal. Then he noticed slight differences between several boards. Different nails, different wood grain. A repair. Someone had altered this section intentionally. His heart began racing. Using a pry bar he found nearby, Jack carefully lifted the boards. Dust exploded upward. A hidden cavity appeared beneath the floor. Inside sat a small metal ammunition box. Shadow immediately sat down, watching, waiting, almost proud. Jack couldn't help smiling. "You found it." The German shepherd's tail wagged. Slowly, confidently. Jack opened the box. His breath caught. Inside were cassette tapes, several rolls of film, a stack of documents sealed in waterproof bags, and a small tape recorder. Rachel's backup files. Exactly as her journal suggested. Jack sat on the floor and carefully inserted one of the tapes. The old machine clicked. Static filled the room. Then a woman's voice emerged. Young, clear, nervous, Rachel Dawson. "If anyone is listening to this," Static interrupted briefly. "Then something has gone wrong." Jack exchanged a glance with Shadow. The tape continued. "For months, I've been documenting illegal logging operations connected to land acquisitions around Cedar Ridge." More static. "I thought it was only environmental violations." Rachel's voice grew quieter. "I was wrong." Jack leaned closer. Outside, the wind pushed against the tower walls. The old building creaked softly. The recording continued. "There are people involved who control permits, inspections, and property transfers." Rachel paused. When she spoke again, fear was unmistakable. "They know I'm investigating." Jack felt a chill. The tape suddenly seemed less like evidence and more like a message from a ghost. "I've copied everything." Her voice trembled. "If these recordings are discovered, they'll know I found the truth." Another pause. Then the words that changed everything. "I believe Calvin Granger is connected." Jack sat perfectly still. The name echoed through the room. Calvin Granger, again. The respected businessman. The powerful ranch owner. The town benefactor. Rachel continued. "I don't know how high this goes." The fear in her voice deepened. "I don't know who can be trusted." Then came silence. Several seconds passed. When Rachel spoke again, her voice had changed. Not fearful, resigned, as though she already knew what was coming. "If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident." Jack felt anger building. Not sudden anger, cold anger. The kind that settles deep and stays there. Rachel knew. She knew she was in danger. She knew people wanted her silenced. Yet she kept investigating. The tape ended with one final sentence. "They're watching me now." The recorder clicked off. Silence filled the tower. Neither Jack nor Shadow moved. The emotional weight of the recording settled heavily over the room. Rachel Dawson wasn't simply a missing person anymore. She was a woman who had knowingly walked into danger because she believed the truth mattered. And 50 years later, that truth was still dangerous. Jack stared through the tower windows. Far below, Cedar Ridge rested peacefully in the valley. Churches, schools, homes, people living ordinary lives. Most of them probably had no idea what secrets were buried beneath the town's history. Shadow moved beside him and pressed against his leg. Jack rested a hand on the dog's neck. For several moments they remained there together. Then he carefully packed the tapes and documents into his backpack. The evidence was growing. The mystery was becoming clearer. But so was the danger. Because Rachel Dawson had left behind one final certainty. She hadn't disappeared because she got lost. She hadn't vanished by accident. Someone had wanted her silence. And now, for the first time, Jack Mercer understood exactly why his father had spent the rest of his life searching for answers. Someone had wanted her silence. And now, for the first time, Jack Mercer understood exactly why his father had spent the rest of his life searching for answers. The drive back from the fire lookout tower felt longer than usual. Storm clouds gathered above the Bitterroot Mountains, casting moving shadows across the valleys below. Shadow sat quietly beside him. The German shepherd's eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. The evidence they carried filled an entire backpack now. Rachel's journal, the hidden photographs, the cassette recordings. Every new discovery painted the same picture. Rachel Dawson had uncovered something dangerous, and someone had spent 50 years making sure the truth stayed buried. Jack gripped the steering wheel tighter. The anger inside him had changed. It was no longer fueled by curiosity. It was fueled by injustice. Rachel had known she was being watched. His father had known he was being watched. And now Jack was being watched. The pattern was impossible to ignore. By the time he reached Cedar Ridge, the sky had darkened. Rain threatened in the distance. Jack decided to stop at the diner before returning to the cabin. He needed coffee. He needed time to think. Most importantly, he needed to figure out what came next. The diner was quieter than usual. Only a handful of customers occupied the booths. The waitress recognized him immediately. She greeted him with a nervous smile. Jack ordered coffee and sat near the window. Shadow settled at his feet. For several minutes, everything seemed normal. Then the front door opened. Every conversation inside the diner instantly softened. Not stopped, softened. The reaction was subtle. But Jack noticed. Years of military service had trained him to notice changes in a room. A tall man entered, late 50s, broad shoulders, weathered face, sheriff's badge. County Sheriff Darren Holt. The sheriff scanned the room. His eyes landed on Jack immediately. Then he smiled. A calm, reassuring smile. The kind public officials practiced for years. He walked directly to Jack's table. "Mind if I sit?" Jack shrugged. "Free country." Holt lowered himself into the booth. Up close, he looked tired. Lines creased his face. His eyes carried the weight of someone who had spent decades dealing with other people's problems. At least, that was the impression he projected. Shadow immediately stood. The German shepherd moved between Jack and the sheriff. Not aggressive, not threatening, protective. Holt paused. His smile tightened slightly. "Beautiful dog." Shadow didn't move. Jack rested a hand on the dog's neck. "What's on your mind, Sheriff?" Holt glanced around the diner, then lowered his voice. "You're asking questions." Jack said nothing. "Questions about Rachel Dawson." Still nothing. Holt sighed. "Word travels fast around here." Jack studied him carefully. "Then you already know why." The sheriff nodded. "I know about your father." That got Jack's attention. "What about him?" Holt leaned back. He wasn't the man people claimed he was. The answer surprised him. Most people in town avoided discussing William Mercer. This was the first official willing to acknowledge him. Then why didn't anyone help him? The sheriff looked uncomfortable. Small towns don't always handle things well. The answer sounded honest, maybe too honest. For the next 20 minutes they talked. About William, about Rachel, about Cedar Ridge. Holt seemed unusually open. He admitted there had been inconsistencies in the original investigation. He admitted Rachel's disappearance never fully made sense. Most importantly, he admitted something Jack hadn't expected. "If your father kept searching all those years," Holt said quietly, "he probably had a reason." Jack stared at him. For the first time since arriving in Montana, someone in authority seemed willing to listen. The possibility felt almost dangerous. Hope often was. Before leaving, Holt handed Jack a business card. "If you find something important, call me." Jack accepted it. The sheriff stood, then paused. "You should be careful." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Holt glanced toward the rain-darkened mountains beyond the window. "Because people don't like old secrets being disturbed." Then he left. The door closed behind him. Silence lingered. Jack looked down at the card. Maybe he finally had an ally. A lawman. Someone with access to records. Someone capable of helping. At least that was what logic suggested. Shadow disagreed. The dog remained standing, his eyes fixed on the door long after Holt disappeared. A low growl vibrated deep inside his chest. Jack frowned. "What is it?" Shadow turned toward him. The growl continued. Not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakable. The dog didn't trust the sheriff. Hours later, back at the cabin, Jack found himself replaying the conversation. Something about Holt seemed genuine. Yet Shadow's reaction bothered him. The German Shepherd had proven right too many times already. Jack trusted the dog's instincts. More than most people. The following afternoon, Holt called. His tone sounded friendly, helpful. "I found something." Jack sat upright. "What?" "Old case records." That got his attention immediately. "Where?" "Not over the phone." The sheriff hesitated. "I think we should meet." Jack considered it. "Where?" "Old marina on Pine Lake." The location surprised him. The marina sat miles from town. Remote, quiet, almost abandoned this time of year. "Why there?" "No interruptions." The sheriff laughed lightly. "Trust me." After ending the call, Jack stared at the phone. The proposal felt reasonable. Yet something about it bothered him. Shadow noticed the tension immediately. The dog walked over. Jack scratched behind his ears. "What do you think?" Shadow simply stared at him. The answer was obvious. The next day, Jack drove toward Pine Lake. The marina rested beside a cold mountain lake surrounded by dense forest. Clouds drifted across the water. The docks creaked softly in the wind. Only a few boats remained tied to the aging wooden slips. The place felt isolated, too isolated. Jack parked. Shadow jumped out beside him. The dog immediately became alert. Every muscle tightened, every sense activated. The sheriff's truck sat near the docks. Holt waved from a distance. Jack approached carefully. Something felt wrong, very wrong. The sheriff greeted him warmly, but Shadow stopped moving. The German Shepherd's stare locked onto a second vehicle hidden behind an equipment shed. A black SUV, dark windows, engine running. Jack's pulse quickened. Years of training screamed warnings inside his head. His eyes scanned the area. Too quiet, no fishermen, no workers, no visitors, just the sheriff. The silence, then he saw it, the reflection of binoculars inside the SUV. Someone watching. The final piece clicked into place. Holt wasn't helping. He was managing, monitoring, controlling. Jack suddenly remembered every coincidence. The timing, the questions, the convenient offers of assistance. The sheriff already knew too much, far too much. Holt noticed the change in Jack's expression. For the first time, the friendly smile disappeared. Only for a second. But it was enough. Jack saw the truth, and Shadow had known it all along. The German Shepherd stepped forward. A deep growl rolled from his chest. The sheriff's eyes hardened. The mask had slipped, only briefly. But long enough, Jack understood the law wasn't on his side. The law was protecting someone. Someone powerful. Someone connected to Rachel Dawson. someone connected to Calvin Granger. The realization hit like a punch. His first ally had never been an ally at all. He had been part of the problem from the beginning. The wind swept across Pine Lake. Dark waves rolled against the docks. Shadow positioned himself between Jack and the sheriff, watching, waiting, ready. And in that moment, Jack Mercer finally understood the most dangerous truth yet. The people protecting the secret weren't hiding from the law. They were the law. The people protecting the secret weren't hiding from the law. They were the law. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The wind swept across Pine Lake. Dark water slapped against the docks. The clouds above the mountains had thickened, turning the afternoon sky into a sheet of cold gray steel. Sheriff Darren Holt stood 10 yards away. His expression remained calm, too calm. The smile was gone now. The friendly mask had disappeared. Jack saw the man clearly for the first time. Not a protector, not an ally, a gatekeeper. Someone assigned to make sure certain questions never reached the wrong ears. Shadow's growl deepened. The German shepherd stood between them, every muscle tight, every sense focused. Holt raised both hands slightly. Easy. Jack said nothing. The sheriff glanced at Shadow. Your dog doesn't like me. No. Jack's voice was flat. He doesn't. Silence stretched between them. Finally Holt sighed. You're making a mistake. Jack almost laughed. The statement sounded familiar. Men had said the same thing overseas. The same thing before betrayals, before ambushes, before bad situations turned deadly. Am I? The sheriff's eyes narrowed. You're chasing ghosts. Jack held his gaze. And you're protecting someone. For a brief moment, irritation flashed across Holt's face. Then it vanished. The calm returned. But the damage was done. Jack had seen the truth. The sheriff stepped back. The conversation was over. Neither man said another word. Jack turned and walked toward his truck. Shadow stayed glued to his side. Only when they were halfway across the parking area did Jack hear engines starting. Both vehicles, the sheriff's truck and the black SUV. The message was clear. The game had changed. The drive back toward the mountains began quietly. Too quietly. Jack checked his mirrors constantly. No vehicles followed, at least not openly. The road twisted through forests glowing beneath the late afternoon light. Everything looked peaceful. But appearances no longer meant anything. Not after Pine Lake. By sunset he reached the cabin. The first thing he noticed was the front gate. Open. Jack froze. He always closed it. Always. Years of military discipline had turned simple habits into reflexes. The gate should have been shut. Shadow noticed it too. The German shepherd immediately moved ahead. Alert, focused. Jack killed the engine. Neither made a sound. The cabin sat at the end of the dirt road exactly as before. Nothing appeared damaged. Nothing appeared disturbed. Yet the open gate felt wrong. Very wrong. Jack retrieved a flashlight from the truck. Together, they approached the cabin. Every step heightened the tension. The forest seemed unusually quiet. No birds, no squirrels, no movement. Only the whisper of wind through the pines. Halfway to the porch, Shadow stopped. The dog's ears stood upright. His nose lifted toward the air. Then he growled. Jack followed his gaze. A figure emerged from behind the cabin. The man froze upon seeing them. For 1 second, neither side moved. Then the stranger bolted. He sprinted toward the woods. Jack reacted instantly. Shadow! The German shepherd exploded forward. The chase began. The man crashed through brush and fallen branches. Shadow gained ground rapidly. Years of training transformed the dog into a blur of muscle and determination. Jack followed as fast as he could. The stranger reached the tree line, then disappeared into dense forest. Moments later, an engine roared to life somewhere beyond the trees. Headlights flashed between trunks. A vehicle accelerated away. By the time Jack and Shadow reached the road, it was gone. Only dust remained. Jack stood breathing heavily. His pulse hammered. The stranger had been inside the property, searching, looking for something, or confirming something. Back at the cabin, the evidence became obvious. Drawers opened, cabinets disturbed, closets searched. Someone had gone through the house. Not randomly, methodically. The intruder had been looking for Rachel's evidence, or perhaps the camera, or the memory card. The realization chilled him. Whoever they were, they knew exactly what mattered, and they knew where he lived. Night fell quickly. Clouds swallowed the moon. The temperature dropped. Jack secured the cabin, locked every door, covered every window. Old habits returned, the habits of a man who understood danger. At 9 o'clock, his phone buzzed. Unknown number, Jack answered cautiously. No voice came immediately, only silence. Then a man finally spoke. Low, calm, deliberate. Walk away. The line went dead. Jack stared at the screen. The threat wasn't dramatic. That made it worse. The caller hadn't shouted, hadn't demanded, hadn't explained. Because he assumed Jack already understood. Someone wanted him gone, and they were becoming impatient. Shadow remained beside the front window, watching the darkness. The German shepherd seemed unable to relax, as if he sensed what was coming. Around midnight, snow began falling. Large flakes drifted through the darkness. The first storm of the season. Jack sat at the kitchen table reviewing Rachel's recordings again. One sentence kept returning. They know I'm investigating. The same fear, the same pressure, the same isolation. For the first time, Jack fully understood what Rachel must have felt and what his father had endured. The realization made him angrier than ever. Around 2 a.m, Shadow suddenly jumped to his feet. A sharp bark shattered the silence. Jack was moving before conscious thought caught up. Outside, engines. More than one. Headlights appeared through the trees, then another, and another. 3 vehicles, approaching fast. Jack's pulse surged. The vehicles weren't stopping at the road. They were heading directly toward the cabin. The snow intensified. Wind howled through the mountains. Jack grabbed his backpack. Rachel's evidence, the recordings, the journal, everything. No way was he leaving it behind. Outside, the vehicles entered the clearing. Their headlights illuminated the cabin. Shadow barked furiously. Jack didn't wait. He moved out the rear door. Into the storm. The mountains swallowed them almost immediately. Snow reduced visibility. Branches whipped through the darkness. Behind them, vehicle doors slammed. Voices carried through the wind. Jack couldn't make out the words. Only the intent. The hunters had arrived. The next hour became a desperate race through the wilderness. Jack navigated using memory and instinct. Shadow stayed close, always scanning, always listening. The snow deepened. The forest grew darker. Several times Jack heard engines searching nearby. Spotlights swept through the trees. The people pursuing them knew the terrain, but Jack knew something else. How to survive. Years of SEAL training returned automatically. Movement, concealment, route selection. Every decision mattered. Every mistake carried consequences. At one point, headlights suddenly appeared ahead. Another vehicle, blocking the logging road. Jack immediately veered into thicker woods. Shadow followed without hesitation. The snow muffled their footsteps. The darkness concealed them. For several tense minutes they moved silently between towering pines. Then came the sound. A shout. Close. Too close. Someone had spotted movement. The chase intensified. Branches snapped. Footsteps pounded. The distance between hunter and prey collapsed rapidly. Jack's lungs burned. The cold air cut through his chest, yet he kept moving. Shadow suddenly surged ahead. The dog stopped beside a frozen creek. Jack understood instantly. The ice, tracks, a perfect opportunity. Together they crossed the frozen surface, then doubled back through dense timber. The maneuver bought precious minutes. Maybe more. The voices faded. The searchers continued in the wrong direction. For now, hours passed. The storm grew worse. Snow covered everything. The mountains became a world of white shadows. Then disaster struck. As they moved through a narrow stand of trees, a dark figure emerged unexpectedly from behind a fallen log. The man lunged forward. Shadow reacted instantly. The German shepherd launched himself between Jack and the attacker. The collision happened fast. Too fast. The man stumbled backward. Shadow drove him off balance. Jack pulled away into the darkness. But during the struggle, Shadow yelped. A sharp sound. Brief. Painful. The dog immediately recovered and continued running. Yet Jack noticed something wrong. Dark stains appeared against the snow. Blood. Shadow had been injured. Fear punched through Jack harder than any threat directed at himself. For a moment he forgot the pursuers, forgot the evidence, forgot everything except the dog. The one companion who had never abandoned him. The one constant presence through homelessness, nightmares, and isolation. Shadow kept moving, refused to slow down, refused to quit. But the sight of blood in the snow stayed with Jack. Because, for the first time since this nightmare began, he realized there was something he could not afford to lose. And somewhere behind them, hidden within the storm, the hunters were still coming. Because, for the first time since this nightmare began, he realized there was something he could not afford to lose. And somewhere behind them, hidden within the storm, the hunters were still coming. The snow fell harder. Wind drove icy crystals through the darkness. The Bitterroot Mountains had become a white wilderness of shifting shadows and hidden dangers. Jack Mercer crouched beneath a cluster of dense pines, breathing hard. Beside him, Shadow stood silently. The German shepherd's shoulder was bleeding. Not heavily, but enough. Enough to make Jack's stomach tighten. He quickly examined the wound using the beam from a small flashlight. The injury cut through the fur along the upper shoulder. Painful, but not life-threatening. Shadow remained still throughout the examination. Never whining, never complaining. The same quiet toughness that had carried him through years of training. Jack wrapped the wound with supplies from his emergency kit. The dog licked his hand once. A simple gesture. Yet it hit Jack harder than he expected. The bond between them had always been strong, but now it felt different, more fragile, more precious. The storm eventually forced them deeper into the forest. By dawn they reached an abandoned hunter's shelter hidden among the trees. The structure was little more than a wooden shack built decades earlier, but it provided protection from the wind. Jack collapsed onto a rough bench. Exhaustion swept through him. For the first time in nearly 24 hours, the immediate danger seemed distant. Not gone, just distant. Shadow curled beside him. The dog finally slept. Jack watched him for several minutes. Then his attention shifted toward Rachel's recordings. One cassette remained, the final tape, the one he hadn't yet listened to. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside the shelter, he pressed play. Static filled the air. Then Rachel's voice emerged, tired, frightened, determined. "If you're hearing this," a pause, "I may already be gone." Jack felt his pulse quicken. The recording continued. "I've moved the final evidence. More static, the original contracts, the payment records, everything." Jack leaned closer. Rachel lowered her voice, as if she feared being overheard even while making the recording. "It's hidden inside the old Silver Crown mine." Jack froze. The Silver Crown mine. The name meant nothing to him, but Rachel continued. "High above Black Creek Valley." Another pause. The entrance marked by 3 white pines. The tape crackled. Then came the most important sentence. "The evidence proves everything." Jack's grip tightened around the recorder. Rachel took a shaky breath. "If anyone finds this," her voice nearly broke, "please tell my father I tried." Silence followed. Long, heavy, heartbreaking. Then one final statement. "They know where I am." The recording ended. The click of the machine sounded strangely final. Jack sat motionless. The shelter felt colder. The storm outside seemed louder. Rachel had known. Not suspected. Known. She understood exactly what danger surrounded her. Yet she had continued. Because she believed the truth mattered. Jack looked down at Shadow. The dog was awake now, watching him, waiting, the same way he always did. Jack reached over and scratched behind his ears. We have one more stop. Shadow's tail moved slightly, as if he already understood. By late afternoon, the storm weakened enough to travel. The route toward the Silver Crown mine led higher into the mountains, far above Cedar Ridge, far above the valleys. The landscape became increasingly harsh: steep cliffs, narrow ridges, frozen streams. Few people ventured this far anymore. The mine had been abandoned for decades. Most maps didn't even show it. Hours passed. The climb grew more difficult. Several times, Jack considered turning back until spring. But Rachel's final recording pushed him forward. Someone had died protecting the truth. The least he could do was finish the journey. Just before sunset, they found the landmark. 3 white pines, standing together on a wind-swept ridge, exactly as Rachel described. Beyond them lay a dark opening in the mountainside, the Silver Crown mine. The entrance resembled a wound carved into the mountain. Ancient timber supports framed the tunnel. Icicles hung from weathered beams. Snow drifted across the opening. Everything felt silent, abandoned, forgotten. Yet Jack couldn't shake the feeling that history waited inside. Shadow approached cautiously. The German shepherd sniffed the entrance, then looked back towards Jack. Ready. Together they entered. The darkness swallowed them immediately. Their flashlights cut narrow beams through the tunnel. Dust floated through the air. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. The deeper they traveled, the colder it became. Old mining tracks stretched into darkness. Rotting equipment lay scattered along the walls. Time had consumed everything. Nearly an hour passed. The tunnel branched repeatedly. Several routes ended in cave-ins. Others descended deeper underground. Jack followed Rachel's directions carefully. At one intersection, he discovered a faded mark carved into the rock. An arrow, human-made, intentional. Rachel's trail. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Silence pressed against them. The weight of the mountains surrounded them on every side. Then Shadow stopped, completely. The dog stood motionless, his ears forward, his eyes fixed on something ahead. Jack followed the beam of his flashlight. At first he saw only rubble. Then he noticed something pale, something unnatural. His stomach dropped. Bones. Human bones. The remains rested beside a collapsed section of tunnel, partially hidden beneath fallen debris. Time had reduced much of the body to a skeleton, yet fragments of clothing remained: a faded jacket, old boots, a rusted necklace. Jack slowly approached. The flashlight trembled slightly in his hand. Around the neck hung a small pendant. Inside the pendant was a photograph. A young woman, smiling. Rachel Dawson. For several moments, Jack couldn't breathe. 50 years of questions, 50 years of rumors, 50 years of pain. And here she was, at last, found. The realization hit with unexpected force. Rachel had never escaped, never started a new life, never vanished by choice. She had died alone beneath the mountains, still trying to protect the truth. Shadow sat quietly beside the remains. The German shepherd lowered his head, almost respectfully, as if even he understood the significance of the moment. Jack swallowed hard, then noticed something nearby, a metal case, partially buried beneath debris. His pulse quickened. The evidence. He carefully pulled it free. The lock had rusted away long ago. Inside were documents, photographs, contracts, financial records, everything Rachel had described. Everything she had died protecting. Jack opened one file. His eyes widened immediately. Signed agreements, property transfers, bribery records, names, dates, amounts, proof, real proof. Not suspicions, not theories, evidence. And Calvin Granger's name appeared throughout it all. The final piece of the puzzle. The proof Rachel had risked everything to preserve. Jack felt a surge of relief. The mystery was solved. The truth was finally known. Then the mountain shook. The vibration came suddenly, violently. Dust exploded from the ceiling. Shadow barked instantly. A second tremor followed, much stronger. Jack's military instincts screamed warnings. Something was wrong, very wrong. Then he heard it, a distant explosion, muffled by layers of rock, but unmistakable. The mine wasn't collapsing naturally. Someone had triggered it. The tunnel groaned. Support beams cracked. Chunks of stone crashed from above. Shadow lunged toward him. The dog knew. Run now. Jack grabbed the evidence case. The two of them sprinted through the darkness. Behind them, the tunnel began failing. Rock, timber, dust, everything came down. The mountain roared. The sound became deafening. Jack pushed harder. Shadow raced beside him. Then another explosion echoed through the mine. The floor beneath them shuddered. A massive section of tunnel collapsed ahead. Jack changed direction. Too late. The ceiling gave way. The world disappeared beneath falling stone. The last thing Jack saw was Shadow being thrown clear by the blast. Then darkness swallowed everything. Silence followed. Deep beneath the Bitterroot Mountains, the mystery had finally been solved. But the man who uncovered the truth might never live long enough to reveal it. The mystery had finally been solved. But the man who uncovered the truth might never live long enough to reveal it. Darkness, silence, pain. Those were the first things Jack Mercer became aware of. For a long time, he couldn't tell if he was awake or dreaming. The world felt distant, heavy, as if he were trapped beneath an ocean of stone. Eventually, consciousness pushed through the fog. His eyes opened. Absolute darkness surrounded him. A dull ache pulsed through every part of his body. When he tried to move, agony shot through his left leg. Jack gritted his teeth. The memory returned in fragments. The evidence case, Rachel's remains, the explosion, the collapse, the mountain coming down around him. He forced himself to breathe slowly. Military training took over. Panic would waste energy. Panic would cloud judgment. He needed facts. Carefully, he reached for his flashlight. Miraculously, it still worked. The beam illuminated a nightmare. Broken timbers, fallen rock, dust hanging in the stale air. His leg was trapped beneath a massive section of collapsed support beam. Blood stained his jeans, but the wound wasn't immediately fatal. At least not yet. Jack aimed the light upward. A narrow gap remained above him. No visible path to the surface, no obvious escape. Just tons of mountain overhead. The reality settled in. He was buried alive. For several minutes, he simply sat there, listening, hoping. Nothing, no voices, no machinery, no rescue teams, only silence. Then another thought hit him. Shadow. Jack's heart immediately began racing. Shadow! His voice echoed weakly through the collapsed tunnel. Nothing. He called again and again. No response. Fear gripped him harder than the injury. The explosion had thrown the dog clear. That much he remembered. But clear to where? Alive? Injured? Gone? The uncertainty was unbearable. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. Time felt meaningless underground. Eventually Jack heard something. Faint, very faint, a bark. His heart surged. Shadow. Another bark. Distant, above him, alive. The relief nearly overwhelmed him. The dog was alive. Somewhere beyond the collapse. Somewhere on the surface. Jack leaned back against the rock wall. For the first time since regaining consciousness, hope flickered. If Shadow was alive, there was still a chance. Above ground, dawn broke over the Bitterroot Mountains. The storm had passed. Fresh snow blanketed the wilderness. The Silver Crown mine stood silent beneath the pale morning sky. Shadow emerged from the trees. The German shepherd limped heavily. One shoulder remained wrapped from the earlier injury. New cuts marked his muzzle. Dust coated his fur. Yet his eyes remained focused, determined. The dog returned to the collapsed mine entrance. Again and again he barked, dug, whined, pawed desperately at the rubble. The mountain offered no response. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Still Shadow refused to leave. Every instinct told him his partner remained below, waiting, needing help. Eventually, the German shepherd stopped digging. Not because he had given up, because he understood something. He could not save Jack alone. The realization changed everything. Shadow turned away from the mine, then began running. Back through the wilderness, back down the mountain. The journey stretched for miles. Snow covered the trails. Frozen streams blocked his path. Dense forests swallowed the landscape. Yet Shadow never hesitated. The dog moved with singular purpose, driven by instinct, driven by loyalty, driven by something deeper than training. Hours later, far below the mountains, Park Ranger Hannah Pierce sat inside the Cedar Ridge Ranger Station, reviewing reports from the previous storm. The building was quiet. Most visitors avoided the wilderness during early spring weather. The radio crackled occasionally. Nothing unusual. Then barking erupted outside. Hannah looked up. A German shepherd burst through the station doorway, mud-covered, bleeding, exhausted. The dog rushed directly toward her desk. Hannah immediately recognized him. Shadow? She had seen Jack and the dog around town several times. Everyone had. The bond between them was impossible to miss. But Shadow shouldn't have been here alone. The dog barked urgently, then ran toward the door, then back toward Hannah, again and again. The behavior was unmistakable. He was trying to communicate, trying to lead her somewhere. Hannah stood. Years working in wilderness rescue had taught her something important. Never ignore a dog acting like this, especially not a trained working dog. Shadow barked again, louder, more desperate. Then he ran to a wall map mounted beside her office. To Hannah's amazement, the dog placed both front paws against the mountain region north of Black Creek Valley. She stared. The behavior was so intentional, it almost seemed impossible. What happened? Shadow barked, then returned to the door. Hannah grabbed her radio immediately. Within minutes, she had contacted county rescue teams. But assembling a full response would take time. Time she wasn't sure they had. Shadow clearly believed someone was in danger, and every minute mattered. Hannah made a decision. She loaded emergency gear into her Ranger vehicle. Ropes, medical supplies, rescue equipment. Then she opened the passenger door. Shadow jumped inside instantly, as if he knew exactly what was happening. The race back to the mountains began. Deep underground, Jack drifted in and out of consciousness. The darkness seemed endless. The air felt thinner now, colder. His leg throbbed relentlessly. Several times he nearly surrendered to exhaustion. Several times memories pulled him backward. His father's face, Rachel's recordings, the teammates he had lost, the years spent homeless, alone, broken, a lifetime of unfinished things. Then he would hear it, a distant bark, faint, echoing through the mountain. Shadow, still searching, still fighting. The sound became an anchor, a reason to stay awake, a reason to keep breathing. Hours later, Hannah's vehicle reached the abandoned mine road. Shadow exploded from the passenger seat before the engine even stopped. The German shepherd raced toward the collapsed entrance, barking furiously. Hannah followed. The scene immediately told her everything. Fresh collapse, recent disturbance, signs of explosives. Someone had been here. Recently, very recently, she radioed her position. Additional rescue crews were already en route. But another discovery chilled her. Near the edge of the clearing stood a cement mixer, still running, its drum turning slowly, ready, waiting. Hannah's stomach tightened. Someone had planned to seal the mine permanently. The realization made her move faster. Shadow continued barking at a specific section of rubble, again and again. The dog knew exactly where Jack was trapped. Rescue vehicles began arriving shortly afterward. Paramedics, fire crews, technical rescue specialists. The operation started immediately. Ropes were deployed, heavy equipment positioned. Rescuers worked with urgent precision. Every minute increased the risk. Every delay reduced the chances of survival. Shadow remained beside the entrance, watching everything, never leaving, never resting. The sun slowly sank toward the horizon. Then came the breakthrough. One rescuer shouted, "A void." They had located an air pocket beneath the collapse. Hope surged through the team. Hours later, a narrow rescue shaft finally reached the trapped chamber. A voice echoed through the darkness. "Jack, can you hear us?" For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a weak reply emerged. Yeah, the entire rescue site erupted with relief. He was alive, deep below. Jack closed his eyes. For the first time all day, he knew he wasn't alone anymore. And far above, standing beside the rescue shaft, Shadow finally allowed himself to sit. The German shepherd's exhausted body trembled. His injuries hurt. His paws were raw. His shoulder bled through the bandages, yet his eyes never left the opening. Because the dog who had refused to quit had accomplished the impossible. He hadn't just found help. He had saved his partner, and he had saved the truth buried alongside him. He had saved his partner, and he had saved the truth buried alongside him. The rescue operation continued long into the night. Floodlights illuminated the mountainside. Generators hummed. Voices echoed through the freezing air. Rescuers worked with relentless determination beneath the towering pines of the Bitterroot Mountains. At the center of it all sat Shadow. The German shepherd refused medical treatment, refused rest, refused food. His amber eyes remained locked on the rescue shaft, waiting, watching, hoping. Hours passed. Then movement appeared below. A stretcher slowly emerged from the darkness. The crowd fell silent. Jack Mercer was alive. Bruised, exhausted, covered in dust, but alive. The moment Shadow saw him, the dog surged forward. Paramedics barely stepped aside in time. The German shepherd pressed against the stretcher, whining softly, his tail wagging for the first time in days. Jack managed a weak smile. His hand found Shadow's head. For a moment, neither cared about the rescue workers. The reporters beginning to gather. The flashing lights. Nothing mattered except the simple fact that they were both alive. Park Ranger Hannah Pierce watched quietly. She had witnessed countless rescues throughout her career. Few affected her like this one, because everyone present understood the truth. Without Shadow, Jack would have died beneath that mountain. And without Shadow, Rachel Dawson's evidence would have remained buried forever. The following 48 hours changed Cedar Ridge forever. The evidence recovered from the Silver Crown mine reached state investigators almost immediately. Rachel's documents, the contracts, the financial records, the photographs. Every piece fit together with devastating precision. The corruption network was real, and its roots stretched far deeper than anyone imagined. Federal investigators arrived first, then environmental agencies, then financial crime specialists. Soon the quiet mountain town found itself at the center of a growing storm. News crews appeared. Satellite trucks filled parking lots. Questions spread faster than answers. For decades, Calvin Granger had been Cedar Ridge's most respected citizen. The wealthy ranch owner, the philanthropist, the community leader. Now investigators were examining records connected to every corner of his empire. The results came quickly. Illegal land acquisitions, hidden financial transactions, environmental violations buried beneath layers of paperwork, property transfers linked to intimidation. Everything Rachel Dawson had suspected. Everything William Mercer had spent his life trying to prove. One morning, 3 days after Jack's rescue, federal vehicles rolled through the gates of Granger's sprawling ranch. The arrest happened quietly. No dramatic scenes, no speeches, no escape attempt. Just the end of a carefully constructed image. Television cameras captured Calvin Granger, leaving the property surrounded by investigators. For the first time, the powerful businessman looked old. Not powerful, not untouchable, just old. The image spread across every news station in Montana. Then beyond. But Granger's arrest was only the beginning. Because people began talking. People who had remained silent for years. People who feared consequences. People who finally realized the protection surrounding Granger had disappeared. The first major break came from an unexpected source, Sheriff Darren Holt. The same sheriff who had pretended to help Jack, the same man Shadow had distrusted from the very beginning. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Holt agreed to cooperate. His testimony opened doors investigators didn't even know existed. Meetings, payments, influence. Years of quiet manipulation hidden beneath official records. The sheriff's cooperation revealed something even more disturbing. Granger had never acted alone. A network of officials had protected him. Inspectors, local administrators, business partners, people whose names appeared throughout Rachel's files. One by one, the truth emerged. The mystery that began with a missing woman was becoming something far larger. Back at St. Mary's Medical Center, Jack slowly recovered. His injuries required time. His leg remained heavily bandaged. Walking wasn't easy, but every morning he woke to the same sight. Shadow sleeping beside the hospital bed. Hospital rules technically prohibited dogs. Yet somehow exceptions kept being made. Nobody complained. Not after hearing the story. Nurses brought water bowls. Doctors stopped to scratch behind his ears. Patients asked for photographs. Shadow accepted the attention politely, then returned to guarding Jack. Always guarding Jack. One afternoon, Evelyn Brooks arrived carrying a worn leather folder. The elderly photographer looked older than before. But there was relief in her eyes, the kind of relief that only arrives after decades of waiting. Jack greeted her warmly. She sat beside the bed. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, Evelyn opened the folder. Inside were dozens of photographs. Most featured William Mercer, young, hopeful, determined. Pictures from before the loneliness, before the accusations, before the town turned against him. Jack studied each image carefully. It felt like meeting his father for the first time. The real father, not the broken man isolated in a mountain cabin. The man who believed truth mattered. The man who refused to abandon Rachel Dawson. Evelyn's voice softened. He never stopped searching. Jack looked up. She smiled sadly. Even when everyone else gave up, the words hit harder than expected. Because now Jack understood. William Mercer hadn't been obsessed. He hadn't been unstable. He hadn't been guilty. He had simply been right. And for 50 years, nobody listened. The public revelation changed Cedar Ridge. At first, the town reacted with shock, then embarrassment, then regret. Old newspaper stories were re-examined. Records were reviewed. Conversations returned. People began confronting uncomfortable truths. The town had failed Rachel Dawson. But it had failed William Mercer, too. The man they treated like a suspect had spent his life fighting for justice. And now the evidence proved it. A month after the rescue, the town council held a special public meeting. The building overflowed with residents. Television crews packed the rear rows. The atmosphere felt emotional, heavy, necessary. Jack attended with Shadow beside him. His legs still required a cane. Yet he stood before the crowd with quiet confidence. The mayor approached the podium first. His voice trembled slightly. For many years, he began, our community believed the wrong story. Silence filled the room. The mayor continued. We owe William Mercer an apology. No one argued, no one objected. Many lowered their heads, others wiped away tears. The truth was impossible to ignore now. Rachel Dawson's evidence, the investigation, the arrests. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. William Mercer had been innocent, more than innocent. He had been courageous. When Jack finally approached the microphone, the room became completely silent. He looked around slowly, at the faces, the families, the neighbors, the people his father once lived among. Then he spoke. My father spent most of his life carrying a burden that wasn't his. His voice remained steady. He kept searching because he believed Rachel deserved justice. A pause. And because he believed the truth mattered. No one moved. No one interrupted. The words seemed to settle over the room. Jack glanced toward Shadow. The German shepherd sat proudly beside the stage. Alert, loyal, unshakable. For a moment, Jack wished his father could see this. The town finally understood the accusations, the rumors, the years of isolation. None of it had been deserved. The truth had finally arrived. Just late, very late. As the meeting ended, dozens of people approached Jack. Some offered condolences, others offered gratitude. Many simply offered apologies. But one thing became clear. William Mercer's name had been restored. The man the town once blamed had become something else entirely. A symbol of perseverance. A symbol of integrity. A man who sacrificed everything in pursuit of justice. And standing quietly beside his son was the dog, who had made sure that sacrifice was never forgotten. The king of Cedar Ridge had fallen. The truth had finally risen, and for the first time in 50 years, justice no longer felt impossible. It felt real. And for the first time in 50 years, justice no longer felt impossible. It felt real. Summer arrived slowly in the Bitterroot Mountains. Snow retreated from the highest peaks. Wildflowers returned to the valleys. The rivers ran strong with fresh mountain water. And for the first time in decades, Cedar Ridge seemed lighter. As though an invisible weight had finally been lifted. 3 months had passed since Jack Mercer emerged from the Silver Crown mine. 3 months since Rachel Dawson's remains had been recovered. 3 months since Calvin Granger's empire collapsed beneath the truth. The changes were everywhere. Environmental cleanup crews worked throughout the region. State investigators continued reviewing records connected to the corruption network. Several former officials faced charges related to their involvement. And throughout Cedar Ridge, conversations once whispered behind closed doors now happened openly. The town was healing. Slowly, painfully, but genuinely. Jack stood on the porch of his father's cabin and watched the sunrise spill across the mountains. Golden light touched the pine forests. Mist drifted through distant valleys. Birdsong filled the morning air. The view felt different now, not because the mountains had changed, because he had. A cane still rested beside the porch chair. His leg continued recovering. Some injuries healed slowly, others never healed completely. Jack understood both kinds. Behind him, the cabin had been transformed. The old structure no longer felt abandoned. Fresh paint covered weathered walls. Broken shutters had been repaired. The sagging porch reinforced. Flowers bloomed near the front steps. Life had returned to the place. Shadow emerged through the screen door. The German shepherd moved more carefully than before. A faint limp remained from the injuries he suffered during the chase and rescue. The scars across his shoulder had healed. The fur was slowly growing back, yet none of it diminished him. If anything, the scars seemed to add to his quiet dignity. Jack smiled. "Morning, partner." Shadow walked over and rested beside him. Together they watched the sun climb above the mountains. It had become a ritual, a peaceful routine neither seemed eager to break. The nightmares still came occasionally. PTSD did not disappear because justice had been served. Jack understood that now. Healing wasn't a destination, it was a process, a daily choice. Some nights remained difficult, some memories remained painful. But he was no longer facing them alone, and that made all the difference. The financial settlements resulting from the investigations surprised everyone. Several lawsuits against Granger's businesses created funds for environmental restoration. Additional settlements compensated victims harmed by decades of corruption. Jack suddenly found himself with something he never expected: resources, opportunity, a future. Most people assumed he would sell the cabin, leave Montana, start over somewhere else. Instead, he made a different decision. One inspired by both his father and Rachel Dawson. One inspired by his own struggles after returning from war. The Thomas Mercer Veterans Retreat opened 6 weeks later. Located on the land surrounding the cabin, the retreat offered support to veterans battling PTSD, homelessness, isolation, and the difficult transition back to civilian life. The project began small: a few renovated cabins, counseling services, outdoor programs, peer support groups. Yet word spread quickly. Veterans arrived from across Montana, then neighboring states. Some came carrying burdens similar to Jack's. Others came simply seeking peace. Many found both. The old mountain property that once represented loneliness became a place of healing. A place of second chances. A place where people understood one another, without needing explanations. And always nearby was Shadow. The German Shepherd became something of a legend. Visitors recognized him immediately. News stories about the rescue had traveled far beyond Cedar Ridge. Many veterans already knew his name before arriving. Children asked for photographs. Visitors brought treats. Former military handlers admired his discipline and intelligence. Shadow accepted the attention politely, then returned to work, because in his mind he still had a job. Protect Jack, watch over people, stay alert, stay loyal. Some habits never changed. One warm September afternoon, the town gathered for a memorial service honoring Rachel Dawson. The ceremony took place beside Black Creek Canyon, not far from the bridge where her final photograph had been taken. Hundreds attended: environmental advocates, residents, former investigators, reporters, people who had never known Rachel yet felt connected to her story. A bronze memorial stood near the canyon overlook, simple, elegant, meaningful. It honored a young woman who refused to stop asking questions, a young woman who sacrificed everything pursuing the truth. Jack spoke during the ceremony. The crowd listened quietly. Many wiped away tears, not because his speech was dramatic, because it was honest. Rachel's courage had finally been recognized, her story finally understood, and after 50 years she was no longer remembered as a mystery. She was remembered as a hero. Later that same afternoon, another ceremony took place, this one inside Cedar Ridge itself. The town square overflowed with people. Families filled sidewalks. American flags fluttered in the breeze. Television cameras recorded every moment. At the center stood a newly unveiled monument, William Mercer. The man once blamed, the man once ignored, the man once treated like an outsider, now honored publicly. The plaque described him as a truth seeker, a citizen journalist, a man whose perseverance ultimately exposed decades of corruption. Jack stood before the monument for a long time, studying his father's name, thinking about everything he never got the chance to say, everything left unfinished. Evelyn Brooks eventually joined him. The elderly photographer smiled softly. He'd be proud of you. Jack looked toward the mountains. Maybe his father would simply be relieved. Relieved that someone finally listened, that someone finally finished the work. As autumn approached, life settled into a rhythm. The retreat continued growing. The town continued healing. The investigations continued expanding. And for the first time in years, Jack found something unfamiliar. Peace. Not perfect peace, not permanent peace, but real peace. One evening in October, exactly 1 year after Rachel's remains had been recovered, the retreat hosted a dedication ceremony. Veterans, families, residents, supporters, everyone gathered beneath strings of lights hanging between towering pines. Music drifted through the evening air. Laughter echoed across the property. The atmosphere felt warm, hopeful, alive. Near sunset, Hannah Pierce approached Jack carrying a small wooden box. "I think this belongs to you." Jack looked puzzled. The ranger smiled. "It was discovered during the final review of your father's records." Carefully, he opened it. Inside lay another letter. His father's handwriting covered a single page. Jack's hands trembled slightly as he read. "If you're reading this, then you found the truth. And if you found the truth, then you finished what I couldn't. The cabin was never meant to be mine forever. It was meant to become a refuge, a place where wounded people could find their way home. If justice ever came, make this land useful. Help someone. Give them what life forgot to give me. A second chance." Tears filled Jack's eyes. For several moments, he couldn't speak. The letter explained everything. His father hadn't simply left behind a mystery. He had left behind a mission, a purpose, a legacy. The sun slowly disappeared behind the Bitterroot Mountains. Golden light washed across the valley. After the ceremony ended, the guests drifted away. The property grew quiet once more. Jack walked onto the porch carrying one final object, the old camera. William Mercer's camera, the same camera hidden inside the attic. The same camera that began everything. He placed it carefully inside a glass display case overlooking the mountains, not as a relic, not as evidence, but as a reminder. A reminder that truth matters. A reminder that courage matters. A reminder that one determined person can change history. Shadow settled beside him. The German shepherd stretched out comfortably on the porch boards. The evening breeze moved gently through the trees. Far below, lights from Cedar Ridge flickered in the darkness. A town no longer haunted by secrets. Jack rested a hand on Shadow's shoulder. The old scars remained beneath the fur, proof of everything they had survived together. For several minutes, neither moved, neither needed to. The mountains spoke through silence. The same silence that once carried loneliness now carried peace. Jack had arrived in Montana homeless, broken, haunted, certain he had nothing left. Instead, he found a mystery. He found the truth. He found his father. And most importantly, he found a future. The stars appeared one by one above the Bitterroot Mountains. Shadow closed his eyes. Jack smiled. For the first time since returning from war, he felt completely present, completely alive, completely home. He thought he had inherited a mystery. In reality, he had inherited a mission, and a loyal German shepherd named Shadow had helped him complete it. In reality, he had inherited a mission, and a loyal German shepherd named Shadow had helped him complete it. If you believe the truth is always worth fighting for, even when it takes years to come out, comment yes below. We'd also love to know where you're watching from, and if you've ever had a loyal dog stand by you through a difficult time, and if stories about justice, dignity, perseverance, and the unbreakable bond between people and their dogs mean something to you. Be sure to subscribe and join us for the next journey.